The most important part of your timeline posts for our class is the element of historical significance. Now, over the past few years, as I've been using this assignment for New Mexico history classes in particular, I've realized that the notion of historical significance isn't always clear to us. So in this video, what we're going to do is talk about what I mean when I'm asking you to specifically assess the historical significance of the topic that you've chosen. So what do we mean when we talk about something having historical significance? Of course, significance can really depend on your perspective and on the context of what's going on. For our timeline assignments, when you're asked to discuss historical significance, you need to ask yourself if you've really explained in a specific way why your topic matters. In other words, have you explained the so what and who cares? Recently, I was working on an article that's going to be included in an anthology published hopefully in a couple of years, sooner than later. And the editor at the university press told us to be very deliberate about addressing those questions of the so what and who cares. As we know, history is something of a subjective pursuit, and as historians study the past through primary and secondary sources, we have to interpret them. We have to explain why they matter and from what perspective. To help us further think about how this concept will apply to our timeline assignments, I have written a brief timeline post on the Manhattan Project. Please note, this is briefer than yours should be. You want to include as many specific details in your timeline posts as you can, but I just hurried and wrote this one so that I could use it as an example. So here I've stated that the Manhattan Project was the top secret U.S. initiative to create atomic weapons during World War II. Housed in a secret location later revealed to be Los Alamos, New Mexico, scientists came together under the direction, I should say, of Robert Oppenheimer to develop atomic technologies. The team successfully created the world's first atomic weapons and enacted the first test of an atomic bomb in southern New Mexico at the Trinity site. Now that I've written my post and that I've gone through and proofread it, always proofread, I guess, is another lesson to learn from this video, this experiment. Now that I've done that, I need to ask myself, have I addressed significance? Have I addressed the so what? Honestly, I really haven't yet. I have said some things that are significant, but I haven't explained how or why they are significant. For example, I mentioned that as part of the Manhattan Project, the team enacted the first test of an atomic bomb at Trinity. I really wanted to emphasize this because quite often we think that just because something was first, that makes it significant. Not true. So please keep that in mind as you want to address historical significance. Just because something was first does not make it significant. Also, just because something still exists doesn't necessarily mean it's significant either. It just means it has longevity. So as we move on to the next example, or building on this example, we'll think about how to be more specific in terms of explaining significance. So what I've done here is I have added to the paragraph that I originally wrote in order to explain historical significance from a certain perspective. So here I'm talking about the local perspective. I don't use the words historical significance, so I want to point out you don't have to be so formulaic that you say the historical significance of the Manhattan Project is, but you need to, again, explain from a certain perspective why this thing matters, the so what. So for local people, people in San Ildefonso, Pojoaque, in the area of northern New Mexico, a lot of the significance lies in the negative impacts that the Manhattan Project had on the people and the landscapes. As we'll read about, and as you would have to provide in your post to make this case, there was a lot of dumping of nuclear waste in the area right around the labs that has continued to impact local communities and the local landscapes. So again, this is a reason that this matters, that people care. because historical significance can be based on, well, not can be, but is based on perspective, there are always a number of different ways to approach it. In this case, I've added a different paragraph to describe the historical significance of the Manhattan Project. In this case, I've used that more formulaic way of saying the historical significance is. That's totally fine. You can go ahead and do that. In this case, I was thinking globally. I was talking about how the atomic program has altered the world in many ways. And so something that you'll read about that there is more evidence for in the textbook is the way that atomic weapons have actually changed global ecosystems ever since the dawn of the atomic age with the Manhattan Project. So I'm saying here, the work at Los Alamos is what set all of those changes and those events in motion. Please note, I threw these examples together very quickly, as you could tell from the unedited portion up here of still not having fixed director into direction. So what I wanted to point out by saying that is that you need to make sure you have specific examples to make your case. When I say atomic weapons altered global ecosystems, I would want to add the example of finding trace elements of radioactive particles in rivers and the bloodstreams even of animals all across the world to make that case. So be specific and provide evidence when you talk about historical significance. In conclusion, always remember to address that question, I should say, of who cares, so what, in your timeline posts. Make sure that you've done that in a very specific way, taking into account historical context, or in other words, how the topic that you've described relates to different situations in past, present, and future, how it relates, or how it is viewed, I should say, from different perspectives of different people and cultural groups. These are all different ways to approach historical significance in a specific way, and again, to explain the so what and who cares.